Josh had always maintained that a man's domicile was his sanctuary, a realm of tranquility, stability, and dominion in a world that frequently appeared to be descending into chaos. However, that illusion was dispelled the morning he emerged outdoors and discovered his hedge, meticulously pruned and diligently cultivated, utterly flattened. The branches, formerly robust and lively, were diminished to a chaotic assemblage of crushed foliage and fractured twigs. The dirt, where he had invested hours in excavating, planting, and nurturing, bore deep tire tracks, as if someone had intentionally driven across it without consideration. Josh tightened his fists, his breathing measured, yet his heart pounded against his ribs. This was not an accident. This was intimate. I appreciate witnessing entitled individuals receive their due consequences. Subscribe for further intriguing narratives of this nature. Initially, he suspected it might be a careless driver, perhaps a delivery vehicle that misjudged a turn. However, he was already aware of the reality within. It was not arbitrary. This marked the fourth occurrence inside a fortnight. He crouched, tracing the tire tracks with his fingers, observing the pattern. The distribution of weight. Large motor vehicle, sport utility vehicle, possibly even a truck. The type of vehicle that did not only graze a hedge. Negative. The perpetrator deliberately ensured its complete destruction. Subsequently, he discerned it. A small, fragmented piece of plastic lodged among the splintered branches. A fragment of a headlight housing. They made an error. Josh rose, his jaw clenching. He was fully aware of the one responsible for this. Karen Douglas, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, a woman who had undertaken the personal endeavor of regulating the aesthetic of the entire neighborhood, even the specific hue of mulch in residence yards. She had previously attempted to persuade Josh to eliminate his hedge, arguing that it was excessively tall and incongruent with the community's aesthetics. However, that hedge had a purpose beyond mere appearance. It constituted a boundary delineating his property from their regulations. At this point, she was no longer inquiring. Josh cleaned his hands on his slacks and inhaled carefully, willing himself to remain composed. He resided in this residence for 15 years. He refused to be coerced into compliance by a HOA autocrat with excessive leisure time. The fundamental inquiry was, what was her ultimate objective? He ascended to his porch, his thoughts in turmoil. The HOA advocated for neighborhood enhancements, a euphemism for compelling homeowners to adhere to new regulations that consistently appeared to benefit a privileged minority. He disregarded the majority of it, declining to acquiesce to their more absurd requests. And now the situation, an overt assault on his property. Josh devoted the subsequent days to attempting to apprehend her in the act. He modified his pattern, rising earlier, remaining awake later, and observing from his porch with resolute determination. However, Karen exercised caution. Each occurrence transpired while he was not observing, whether he was at the store, beneath the car in the garage, or briefly taking out the trash. It was nearly surgical and meticulously calculated. The remaining neighbors offered no assistance. They were either unwilling to engage or too fearful of reprisal from the HOA. Even elderly Mrs. Henderson, residing across the street and often on her front porch, merely shook her head. "They arrive at night," she remarked, lowering her voice as though someone could be eavesdropping. Swift, as if they wished to remain unnoticed. Josh's patience was diminishing. He was not a man who pursued conflict, yet he also did not retreat when confronted. Subsequently, one evening, it ultimately transpired. He entered briefly to retrieve a wrench from his workstation. Merely 2 minutes. Upon his return outdoors, he recognized it. The remote roar of an engine, the subdued sound of tires on asphalt. Josh's gaze abruptly shifted to the road, and there it stood. A black SUV is slowly passing by his residence. Upon arriving at his driveway, the engine erupted into action. Before Josh could react, it veered sharply off the road and directly into his hedge. Branches fractured akin to bones beneath the vehicle's weight. The profound grinding sound of metal being torn permeated the night air. The SUV not only grazed it, it obliterated it. As swiftly as it arrived, it vanished. The taillights disappeared into the obscurity. Josh remained immobilized for a while, his fists clenched so firmly that his claws penetrated his hands. That was all. Cease all delays. No further displays of cordiality. Karen has just committed a significant error. She was on the verge of discovering the consequences of provoking the wrong individual excessively. Josh remained up throughout the night. He sat in his garage, hands clasping, his coffee mug, gazing at the fragment of broken plastic he had retrieved from the debris. His hedge had vanished once more, although this time he possessed something unbeknownst to them. Proof. Evidence indicating that it was not only a random act of vandalism. The SUV had abandoned more than shattered branches and profound tire imprints. It had created a path. He examined the plastic by turning it over in his palms, scrutinizing the edges. Tailored enclosure. Fortified substance. This was not merely an ordinary automobile. It was a luxury SUV, the type typically driven by affluent and influential individuals. Only one individual in the vicinity matched that description. Karen Douglas. Josh exhibited patience. He played defense. He attempted to apprehend them during their wrongdoing, sought to negotiate, and endeavored to discover a means to circumvent the conflict into which they had entangled him. However, they were not adhering to fair play. They waited until his back was turned. They had acted intentionally. It was now his time. By daybreak, Josh had a strategy. He dedicated the day to fortifying his land, albeit in an inconspicuous manner. He wished to conceal his intention of laying a trap. The remnants of his hedge remained intact, a reminder of the extent of their willingness. However, he was not prepared to tidy it up at that moment. Allow them to believe they have triumphed. Allow them to believe he was vanquished. He excavated the earth, embedding steel rods deep below the surface, stabilizing the remnants of the hedge with substantial stones and concealed supports. At first glance, it appeared disordered. However, underneath, it was a stronghold. On that night, he refrained from sitting on the porch. He did not observe from the windows. He did not remain awake with a flashlight, akin to a neurotic homeowner anticipating the antics of a youngster engaging in pranks. Negative. He retired for the night. Upon their return, they would inevitably acquire a costly lesson. Shortly after midnight, they succumbed to the lure. Josh awoke to the distinct sound of metal grinding against an immovable object. A pronounced, incisive crunch succeeded by a muted thud. For a little moment, silence enveloped the surroundings. Subsequently, an engine coughed, a door banged shut, and indistinct expletives pierced the stillness of the night. Josh leisurely approached the door. There is no necessity for haste. They were not progressing. Upon stepping onto his porch, he observed the black SUV partially ensconced in his hedge. What remained of it? The front end had collapsed inward. The hood collapsed akin to aluminum foil. One of the front tires had ruptured, and extensive abrasions in the paint indicated precisely where the reinforced rods had fulfilled their function. Beside the wreck, Richard, Karen's husband, stood boiling with wrath while grasping his wrist. Josh folded his arms and inclined his head slightly. Experiencing difficulties? Richard spun around, his visage ashen with rage. What did you do? Josh advanced cautiously, allowing the stillness to linger between them. It appears you have encountered an obstacle, Richard. He gestured towards the damaged hedge. You ought to exercise greater caution regarding your driving locations. Richard's jaw tightened, his respiration labored. He was attempting to reverse the situation. How to create the appearance that Josh was the issue. However, he possessed nothing as he was aware of his capture. Josh observed the SUV once again. The destruction was considerable. This situation is significantly more severe than only a broken headlight. Karen's minor conflict had already incurred thousands in expenses, and Josh was far from finished. The following day, he placed more calls. He possessed acquaintances, individuals employed in repair establishments, individuals adept in acquiring information. As anticipated, a black reinforced SUV had been delivered for repairs that morning. Authored by Karen Douglas. Josh exhibited a smile. They were no longer attempting to conceal it. However, what captivated his attention was not the damage report. The shop owner had casually referenced it throughout the call. Karen was not merely an intrusive member of the Homeowners Association. She possessed affiliations: software developers, real estate magnates, municipal authorities, individuals who had been advancing new projects through zoning approvals prior to residents' awareness of the developments. What about Josh's property? It was at the epicenter of a significant event. This transcended mere hedging. They desired his departure. If they were prepared to escalate over a little row of bushes, what actions would they take if he refused to relent? Josh placed the phone down, his thoughts already accelerating towards his subsequent action. He had apprehended them during an act of vandalism. That was merely the beginning. He now needed to disassemble the entire structure. Due to Karen and her associates engaging in games, Josh was on the verge of overturning the entire board. Josh was efficient with his time. He understood that Karen and her associates would not accept the defeat easily. They had already devoted weeks to attempting to dismantle him, attempting to expel him. Upon recognizing his steadfastness, they would intensify their efforts. He was unaware of the extent of their willingness to proceed. The response arrived the following evening. He had been working late in his garage when he heard it. A forceful, intentional rap at the front entrance. Not the type of knock associated with a cordial neighbor. This was sluggish, weighty, a cautionary notice. Josh removed the grease from his hands and proceeded to the door. He did not open it immediately. He activated the porch light and examined the peephole. A gentleman attired in a suit. Not Karen, not Richard, not one of the HOA's customary enforcers. This was another individual, and someone who was out of place here. Josh ajar the door sufficiently to rest against the frame. "May I assist you?" The man smiled, however it was not a cordial smile. It was the type of smile a lender exhibits just before to informing you that your residence is being foreclosed. "Mr. Mackenzie," he articulated, his tone polished and rehearsed, "I am here to provide you with an escape from your present circumstances." Josh remained unblinking. "I was unaware of my need for one." The gentleman laughed softly, as if he had encountered this already. "It is evident that you have complicated matters for yourself. There is no justification for this to deteriorate." He retrieved a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and extended it forward. "This is an amended acquisition proposal. Threefold the market worth of your residence. No obligations involved." Josh declined it. "What if I decline?" The man's smile persisted. However, the warmth evaporated from his eyes. Subsequently, circumstances become erratic. Josh breathed gradually, maintaining a neutral expression. "Is that an intimidation? A forecast?" The man rectified. "I highly recommend you contemplate this option." Josh ultimately seized the paper, briefly examined it, then crushed it in his hand and discarded it onto the deck. Disinterested? For the first time, the man's courteous facade faltered. A flash of annoyance appeared on his face. However, he swiftly regained his composure. "That is disheartening," he remarked, retreating. "It is advisable to contemplate it further before making a decision." He subsequently turned and departed. Josh observed as the man entered a polished black vehicle and departed. He did not require perusal of the contract to comprehend its implications. They had ceased engaging in games. That evening, he fortified every lock on his residence. He reviewed the security cameras, archived the footage, and ensured the functionality of each motion sensor. He was not paranoid. He was ready. These individuals were going to discover how mistaken they were if they believed they could intimidate him into selling. The initial strike occurred 2 days subsequently. It commenced modestly. A correspondence from the municipality citing him for illicit landscaping and requiring the removal of his hedge or the imposition of fines. A wholly contrived grievance from the HOA, alleging his infringement of community regulations. One of his tires had been deliberately cut overnight. Trivial, irksome. However, it is not unexpected. Subsequently, they escalated their efforts. Josh returned home one afternoon to discover his garage had been burglarized. His implements were dispersed. His workbench had been overturned. Amidst the chaos, There lay a brick, accompanied by a message affixed to it. Last chance. Josh felt a chill of fear. This has ceased to be a warning. This constituted a commitment. He was not merely somebody who repaired automobiles. He understood the mechanisms at play. He had accumulated sufficient experience with mechanics, construction workers, and business proprietors to recognize when a transaction was being coerced. He understood the consequences that would follow if he did not concede. He possessed knowledge that eluded them. He had documented everything. Each interaction, each telephone conversation, all security notifications. He had secured footage of the black SUV crashing through his hedge. He has documentation on every illicit permit application associated with Karen and her associates. He possessed a name. The man in the suit had deliberately refrained from introducing himself. However, Josh had conducted a license plate inquiry on the black sedan. What is the name on the registration? Paul Langford is a developer, one possessing a history of dubious transactions and vanished documentation. The type of individual who refused to accept rejection. Josh refrained from contacting the police. They would not take any action. Karen had an excessive number of individuals in her pocket. Langford had larger individuals in his. Instead, he proceeded directly to the media. He dedicated the subsequent hours to uploading the content. Duplicated counterfeit documents, money transactions associated with Langford's enterprises, and aerial footage of unauthorized construction projects that had commenced on territory they had yet to possess. Subsequently, he dispatched an anonymous tip to all prominent news organizations within the state. He realized the moment the narrative broke. His phone starting vibrating. Emails inundated the inbox. Journalists are requesting interviews. The city council abruptly sought to reevaluate many recently approved permits. Subsequently, Karen arrived at his residence punctually. Initially, Josh did not respond to the doorbell. He saw from the window as she stood on his porch, arms crossed, holding her phone. She was enraged. After 1 minute, she struck the door forcefully. "Reveal yourself, Josh." He proceeded at a leisurely pace. Upon his eventual opening of the door, she was fuming. She retorted, "You are unaware of the consequences of your actions." Josh exhibited a smile. "I am rather certain that I do." "You have just rendered yourself a target," she growled. "Do you believe Langford will simply overlook this? Do you believe I will let this to pass without consequence?" Josh reclined against the doorframe. "Do you observe? That is the issue, Karen. I believe you no longer own an option." She advanced, modulating her voice to a lower volume. "You will come to regret this decision." Josh raised his phone and touched the screen. A crimson light flashed intermittently, commencing recording. Karen's complexion became ashen. Josh grinned smugly. "Smile, Karen. You are being recorded." She retreated, her countenance reflecting a blend of panic and fury. Silently, she pivoted and departed angrily. Josh shut the door and secured it, exhaling gradually. He had just revealed the entire situation, and he was certain that the true conflict was only beginning. Josh experienced minimal sleep that night. He recognized that he had initiated an irreversible process. The news disseminated more rapidly than he anticipated. Numerous reports of dubious property transactions, counterfeit permits, and illicit construction endeavors associated with Langford proliferated. The HOA was not only under examination, it was besieged. Karen aired by arriving at his residence and threatening him as he recorded the incident. Upon uploading the clip, inquiries began to arise. Inquiries the HOA preferred to avoid addressing. By daybreak, the repercussions had commenced. The initial indication was the urgent rapping on his door. Not a mere knock, but an urgent, frantic beating. Josh was already aware of the identity of the visitor prior to opening the door. Karen stood there, her hair disordered, eyes wide with trepidation. She entered without allowing him to utter a word, forcefully closing the door behind her. "You must remove that video," she exclaimed. Josh merely gazed at her. "Good morning to you as well." She inhaled deeply in an attempt to compose herself, although she was utterly unsuccessful. "Josh, pay attention. You failed to comprehend the consequences of your actions. Langford is dissimilar to us. Do you believe this pertains to HOA penalties and property conflicts? You have exposed the incorrect individuals. Josh crossed his arms. You are ultimately conceding it. This was never concerning my hedge. Was it? Karen averted her gaze, her jaw clenching. The hedge was really a pretext. Langford required the land. Our intention was to complicate matters for you, exert pressure, until you capitulated. Josh experienced a chilling wrath coalesce within him. He had been aware of it, but seeing her articulate it rendered it tangible. He declined by shaking his head. Were you agreeable to that? She chuckled with bitterness. Do you believe I had an option? Are you aware of the consequences of declining Langford's request? Josh remained unresponsive. Karen ran her fingers through her hair, breathing unsteadily. Josh, I am indifferent to your animosity towards me. I am indifferent to your desire for my accountability in this matter. However, I must inform you that if you do not desist, Langford will pursue you. Josh scrutinized her for an extended period. Her eyes are already wide. What is it? Josh gestured toward the corner of his living room. A small red light flashed on his security system. He retrieved his phone and perused the footage. He stated last night, orienting the screen toward her. Karen's complexion diminished in color. The video depicted a black SUV stationary outside his residence. Absence of headlights, lack of motion, merely observing and anticipating. According to Josh, they remained present for about an hour, merely seated. Subsequently, they departed. Karen gulped audibly. That does not constitute a warning. This is a communication. Josh's jaw tightened. He anticipated retribution. However, this was distinct. This beyond mere intimidation. Langford did not await the cessation of the media frenzy. He was strategizing his subsequent action. Josh had reached his conclusion. He was not yielding. However, he was not inclined to await Langford's actions. He seized his keys. To what destination are you proceeding? Karen inquired. Josh unlatched the door. She hesitated before proceeding to follow. Josh proceeded directly to City Hall. At this point, the news had sufficiently unsettled individuals, prompting some of Langford's supporters to abandon their allegiance. They want separation. Josh was on the verge of compelling the others to comply as well. He entered with Karen following closely behind him, directly to the city clerk's office. The receptionist scarcely glanced upward. Josh stated that he must submit a motion for an emergency hearing, placing a substantial stack of printed paperwork upon the counter. The receptionist scowled. What are the justifications? Josh struck the uppermost page. Fraudulence, unlawful appropriation of land, corruption among homeowners associations. The woman closed and opened her eyes rapidly. You possess evidence. Josh exhibited a smile. Abundant. Within an hour, Langford's entire organization began to disintegrate. City officials hastily sought to dissociate themselves. Members of the HOA board quit abruptly overnight. Investigators commenced the retrieval of permits, financial transactions, and project authorizations. Langford was not only revealed, he was ensnared. By the next evening, Josh received a call. Langford was apprehended not only for land fraud and counterfeit permits, but also for bribing municipal authorities, fabricating paperwork, and coordinating harassment against residents. Karen positioned herself opposite Josh at his kitchen table, fixated on the news displayed on her phone. She murmured in disbelief. Josh reclined. She shook her head in disbelief. I believed he was invulnerable. Josh released a breath. They consistently believe that until they are apprehended. The following day, the HOA was disbanded. The penalties and the contrived grievances, everything disappeared. Josh exited his residence, surveying his yard. The hedge had been removed. For the first time in weeks, he felt as though he had not been defeated. He would reconstruct it. He would cultivate something novel. On this occasion, he would not be the sole observer. Karen approached him. You have indeed triumphed. Josh exhibited a sneer. I was never afforded an option. She looked at him, then at the vacant area where his hedge once stood. I presume you are remaining. Josh acquiesced. Indeed, I am. With that, he pivoted back toward his residence. Ultimately liberated from the conflict that had been imposed upon him, Langford had departed. The homeowners association was dissolved. Josh's residence was ultimately his once more.